question, your place in romance, I think that's a great way to put it. I would say my place in romance, the kind of stuff that I write is character driven and interiority driven romance that takes place in the real world with all of its concomitant challenges, politics, disappointments, desires, and happily ever afters. Sorry, this is like really a tangent. Do you want me to go on a tangent already? It's like minute 3. The way I still remember the way I learned that was a thing you could do, because it actually like changed my understanding of writing forever, because I was in middle school and I was a huge fan of S.E. Hinton, who wrote The Outsiders and all of those books. I was obsessed with those books as a kid, and I've always loved to read, and I guess that as a kid I thought that books just like appeared. Of course I knew people wrote them, but I didn't really think about it. You know, I was a huge reader, and I wrote, okay, this is embarrassing. Speaking of S.E. Hinton, I once wrote, I guess it is fan fiction, although I didn't know the term then as an 11-year-old, but I wrote an entire book, like a full lined notebook length book, that was basically like, from The Outsiders, there's this one scene where Derry is like, you're gonna go to the boys' home if anyone finds out that you're being bad or whatever, if you get in trouble again. And I wrote this book where Soda Pop and Pony Boy get taken to a boys' home and the rest of the outsiders have to rescue them. Like, that was what I wrote. And it was so gay. And so, like, as an 11-year-old, I didn't know that, but as a like queer adult, I'm like, oh my God, of course. I was just imagining it as this like found family, like this homoerotic found family where they all have to stick together and they all do these things. So yeah, so I wrote, I guess my first like real piece of writing was an S.E. Hinton fan fiction. I visited a friend from grad school, my friend Ani, who's wonderful and is actually like someone who reads all my books first. She's like my alpha reader. And I was visiting her, and she's a friend from grad school, and she'd gotten a job in Arizona and moved for work as a professor. And she was one of my few friends who also read romance. I didn't start reading romance until grad school, but we both read it, and she was having a hard time and it was hard to make friends. And she was like, I really wish that there was a romance novel about someone like me, you know, a new professor, someone who doesn't know that many people and feels kind of like a fish out of water, because it would be so comforting to read that. And I said, well, I'll write it for you. I'll write you a story, no problem. And on the plane home from Arizona to Philadelphia, I wrote the first chapter of what would become In the Middle of Somewhere, thinking that it was just like a little one-off thing, and Ani would be like amused by it or whatever. And so when I landed, I sent it to her thinking she would write back like, oh my God, you're such a nerd, I didn't think you'd really do it. But she wrote back and she was really into it. She was like, I have to know what happens to Daniel, tell me everything. And so then I wrote another chapter and I emailed it to her, and she wrote back and was like, okay, this is what I think is going to happen, but what's really going to happen? And in my head, I was like, well, I don't know, because this does not exist. And I basically wrote that book chapter by chapter, emailing it to her just for her. But when I finished it, when I sent her the epilogue, she was like, well, obviously you have to try to publish this, and then you have to start writing me the next book, because this is like my favorite part of the day, is like checking to see if you sent a new chapter. It was so nice. I had never considered publishing it. I had never read romance before the last few years. And I sent it into a publisher and promptly forgot about it, because I didn't ever think that anyone would want to publish it. And when they wrote back to say that they wanted to publish it, I had actually forgotten. Like, I just had written it off. But in fact, I owe my entire writing career in romance to my friend Ani, who I wanted to write a story for, and who encouraged me and like told me to write more things. And she's still my best reader. So No,
Yeah. Amen.
it didn't. And I don't think it was trying to. I think that it's an interesting question because I 100% spent 7 years getting a PhD that as of now, you could technically say I have never used. And when I saw people talking about the 3-act structure as a narrative tool, I could not, with a gun to my head, have told you what the 3-act structure was. Do I know how to analyze a text? Yes. Do I know a lot of stuff about culture? Yes. Was it at all helpful for me in terms of writing? Quite the contrary. Well, I love this question because I am so excited to hear about other people's routines. So I every morning will go and I'll check my pacemaker and it will tell me how many words I'm supposed to write. And I don't know how granular you're interested in me being, Charlotte Ann, but I try to keep my expected word count at 3,000 or below. I find that like when I write more than that in a day, it's kind of hard for me the next day. I feel a little bit burnt out. And yeah, that's what I know I have to write for the day. And I try to do my writing first always. I don't let myself look at email. I don't let myself look at social media. In fact, I turn my phone on do not disturb and I turn off I don't turn off the internet, but I close the internet tab. You know what the internet is, the window. I close the window and I won't look at it until I'm done with my words for the day. And sometimes that takes until 10 a.m. and sometimes that takes until 6 p.m. But I have my word count for the day and I won't let myself do anything else until I hit it. It's an interesting question. I kind of don't know if it will matter to me yet in reality because the 3rd book isn't out yet, which will be the first one for special editions. In theory, it doesn't matter to me at all. It wouldn't matter to me if they were coming out from different publishing houses. It's a series. I wrote it as a series. That's it. But from a business standpoint, Karina and special editions don't have the same rules. And so there are things in the first 2 books, for example, the level of graphicness and the sex scenes, that when we got to the special editions books, I did not know what those books were. And when I started writing the 3rd book, I was like, hey, Carrie, just so you know, I actually think this book wants to be in first person. So I'm doing this one in first person, even though books 1 and 2 are in 3rd. And she wrote back and was like, ooh, so glad you mentioned that, because actually special editions books are always in 3rd person with an alternating POV. And she hadn't told me that because she assumed I knew. And to me, I was like, oh, this is not explicit. I have way more explicit sex scenes. You can't really swear in special editions books much, or you can get away with a couple. And I say every other word. At my books, I swear to God, if you counted up the in my books, it would reach the moon. I eventually had to just write it with in and then edit them out, except that I took out the literal. The fact that I happen to say a lot is not a political standing.
Thank you so much for being here. We'll have to do this again because I have 1,000 more questions for you.
I would love to anytime.